Why the universe isolated you. Life isn't rejecting you, it's preparing you. Your life is a carefully constructed fraud. That suffocating loneliness you feel isn't depression, it's the desperate scream of your slaughtered soul. You've melted a plastic mask to your flesh, and the only way out is to descend into the dark and face the monster you've buried. Existential pain and the tragedy of the persona. Have you ever looked into the mirror and realized, with a sudden paralyzing terror, that the face staring back is a complete stranger? You are standing in the epicenter of a roaring crowd. The bass is thumping through the floorboards, laughter is ricocheting off the walls, and the physical heat of 100 human bodies presses in on you. Yet, in this vibrant theater of connection, a glacial, suffocating void rips open inside your chest. You are surrounded, yet you feel entirely, devastatingly extinct. You are witnessing the curated triumphs of 1,000 digital lives, scrolling until your eyes burn in the sterile blue glow of the darkest hours, only to realize that you are tethered to the entire planet, yet completely severed from the human race. What if I told you that this agonizing, hollow ache you feel is not a disease, but the very first gasp of your dying soul trying to resuscitate itself? The inner multiverse welcomes you to a journey beyond the veil of the ordinary. If this chilling echo of isolation resonates within your bones, I urge you to subscribe to our channel right now. Your support is the vital energy that allows us to continue unearthing these profound psychological truths, guiding us all through the darkness and into the light. For generations, we have been force-fed a tragic lie. We have been conditioned to view this agonizing brand of loneliness as a fatal flaw in our social programming, a pathetic pathology to be medicated, ignored, or aggressively socialized away. Modern culture points a clinical finger at your isolation and calls it a sickness. They tell you to smile wider, speak louder, and force your bruised spirit into the relentless, grinding machinery of the collective. But from where I sit, observing the quiet tragedies of human existence, I see a profoundly different truth. What if this paralyzing alienation is not a failure to adapt, but the most urgent, lucid symptom of a psychological awakening? To grasp the terrifying beauty of this pain, we must descend into the depths explored by Carl Jung. He understood that the freezing isolation you feel in a crowded room is not born from a lack of physical bodies, but from a total, devastating lack of authenticity. It is the blood price we pay for what Jung called the persona. The persona is not merely a mask. It is a psychological armor we weld onto our skin to survive the merciless judgments of the herd. From our very first breath, society begins handing us the blueprints of compliance. We learn with agonizing precision which parts of our raw, wild nature must be amputated to avoid abandonment. We construct an avatar, the perpetually agreeable friend, the flawless employee, the silently suffering partner. A mask, initially, is a survival tactic, a necessary bridge to navigate the treacherous waters of societal expectations. But here lies the ultimate human tragedy, one I have watched consume countless lives. We wear the mask with such desperate conviction that the plastic eventually melts into our flesh. We forget it is a performance. We begin to believe that we are the job title, the curated digital profile, the polite nod. We drag the sprawling, chaotic, magnificent cosmos of our true selves to the altar of conformity and slaughter it just for a fleeting whisper of applause. We trade the sacredness of our authenticity for the cheap, hollow illusion of belonging. But the human psyche is a living, breathing ecosystem, and it will violently reject this artificial suffocation. That crushing, existential loneliness you feel, that hollow ache that keeps you awake at night, is the agonizing gap between who you actually are and the ghost you are pretending to be. Those people in the crowded room, they are not interacting with you. They are interacting with your mask. And a mask cannot absorb warmth. It cannot receive love. Maintaining this elaborate illusion requires an astronomical, draining sacrifice of your life force. You are the exhausted director, actor, and captive audience of a play you desperately want to cancel. This pain is not a malfunction. It is a divine, violent disruption. It is the muffled, desperate scream of your buried true self, beating its bloody fists against the walls of the persona, begging for liberation. It is the stark, beautiful realization that the approval of the herd is absolute poison, and that your soul is finally demanding to be set free. confronting the shadow and the cost of suppression. To answer this desperate plea for liberation, we must first be willing to walk away from the applause and descend into the terrifying basement of our own minds. This subterranean realm is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the psychological graveyard where we have buried every unacceptable, unpalatable, and unpolished fragment of our humanity. When we were children, eager for love and terrified of rejection, we performed a brutal surgery upon ourselves. We took our wildness, our rage, our eccentricities, our raw sexual desires, and our deep, inexplicable sorrows, and we locked them away in the dark. We sacrificed our wholeness for the sake of goodness. But the things we banish do not simply cease to exist. They fester, they ferment, and they orchestrate our lives from the unseen depths. I have watched so many people frantically trying to outrun this darkness, filling their schedules to the brim, drowning themselves in noise, substances, and superficial chatter just to avoid a single moment of silence. Because in the silence, the shadow speaks. It speaks through the sudden, irrational bursts of anger you feel toward a loved one. It speaks through the crippling envy you harbor when witnessing someone else's uninhibited joy. It speaks through that heavy, leaden apathy that drags you out of bed every morning, whispering that your life is a carefully constructed fraud. We are terrified to look at these exiled parts of ourselves because we believe that if we acknowledge them, we will become monsters. We fear that the darkness will consume whatever fragile identity we have managed to scrape together. But this is the second great tragic lie of the human condition. The shadow is not evil. It is merely primitive, raw, and desperately starved of oxygen. It contains not just our neuroses, but our greatest untapped reservoirs of creativity, vitality, and power. Your existential loneliness is directly proportional to the amount of yourself you have rejected. You feel empty because you have literally emptied yourself out to fit into a mold that was never designed for your soul. True healing does not begin with positive affirmations or forcing yourself to attend another meaningless social gathering. It begins with the courage to descend into your own darkness with a torch in hand. It requires you to sit in the dirt with your shame, your grief, and your anger, and finally say to them, "I see you, and you belong to me." Only by reclaiming the discarded fragments of your spirit can you begin to fill the suffocating void in your chest. The wilderness of individuation and the price of truth. Yet, stepping out of the darkness and carrying those reclaimed pieces of your soul into the unforgiving light of day requires a terrifying passage through the wilderness of complete solitude. This is the threshold of what Jung termed individuation, and it is a brutal, unglamorous crucifixion of the false self. Society loves the concept of self-discovery only when it is packaged as a weekend retreat or a catchy slogan. But the actual lived reality of becoming yourself is often a profoundly isolating and destructive process. When you stop playing the role assigned to you, the system surrounding you will inevitably short-circuit. I want to be brutally honest with you about what happens when you finally take off the mask. People will leave. The relationships that were entirely dependent on your compliance, your silence, or your willingness to be a supporting character in someone else's narrative will collapse under the weight of your newfound authenticity. You will be called selfish, arrogant, or lost. The herd will relentlessly attack what it cannot control, projecting their own unexamined fears onto your rebellion. They will try to guilt you back into the comfortable box they built for you, because your courage to break free holds up a terrifying mirror to their own self-imprisonment. This is the phase of the journey where most people turn back. The gravitational pull of the familiar is immensely strong, and the prospect of standing entirely alone in the world brings a primal evolutionary terror to the surface. But you must hold your ground. This agonizing shedding of dead weight is not a punishment, it is a sacred purification. You are not losing your tribe, you are dismantling a hostage situation. To individuate means to become an indivisible, whole entity, and you cannot achieve this while your emotional survival is mortgaged to the opinions of others. You must learn to endure the wilderness. You must learn to sit in a room by yourself on a Friday night, feeling the acute sting of societal exclusion, and recognize it as the price of admission to your own life. In this vast, quiet emptiness, stripped of the noise of expectations and the dizzying spin of performative existence, a profound shift occurs. You stop listening to the chorus of external demands and finally begin to hear the quiet, steady, and ancient voice of your own intuition. This solitude is not an exile. It is an incubator. It is the sacred space where the fragile, newborn truth of who you are is allowed to breathe, stretch, and eventually forge a spine of absolute steel. The alchemy of suffering and the birth of meaning. Within this barren wilderness of isolation, however, a profound psychological alchemy begins to take place, transforming your deepest suffering into the very foundation of your new existence. When you stop fighting the loneliness and allow it to wash over you, the pain slowly ceases to be a chaotic, senseless torment and becomes an instrument of precision. It is the chisel that carves depth into your previously two-dimensional soul. We live in a culture that treats suffering as a glitch in the matrix, an anomaly to be eradicated with immediate gratification. But to the individuated mind, suffering is recognized as the fiercest and most devoted teacher you will ever encounter. Think about the profound melancholy you felt when you realized the world's promises of happiness were hollow. That grief was not clinical depression. It was the birth pangs of profound philosophical insight. It was the moment you outgrew the sandbox of superficial existence. When you take ownership of your suffering rather than playing the victim to it, you initiate a radical internal shift. You transition from an external locus of control, where your self-worth rises and falls on the tides of public opinion, to an unbreakable internal fortress. This is the psychological alchemy. Base metals of grief, rejection, and isolation are transmuted into the gold of unshakable self-respect. You begin to realize that you survived the loss of your mask, you survived the departure of those who only loved your avatar, and you survived the crushing silence of your own mind. And because you survived, you are no longer afraid. The terror of being judged loses its venom. What can the judgment of a stranger possibly do to a person who has already walked through the fires of their own inner hell and emerged intact? You begin to walk through the world with a different kind of gravity. You no longer enter a room calculating what you need to do to be liked. You enter wondering if the people there have anything genuine to offer your soul. Your energy is no longer scattered to the wind, exhausted by the manic maintenance of an illusion. Instead, it pools deep within your center, creating a formidable presence. People can feel this shift. They cannot always articulate it, but they sense that they are standing in the presence of someone who has stopped asking the world for permission to exist. Your pain has given you the one thing that no amount of money, status, or popularity could ever buy: undeniable, unshakable sovereignty over your own spirit, the return to authentic connection and true wholeness. Having survived the crucible of this inner transformation, you do not remain forever in the wilderness, but rather return to the world to forge connections that are finally, undeniably real. The journey of individuation does not end in bitter hermitage. It circles back to humanity, but on entirely different terms. You walk back into that crowded room from the beginning of our story, but this time, the bass thumping through the floorboards does not echo in an empty chest. The glacial void is gone, replaced by a warm, glowing furnace of self-acceptance. Because you are no longer wearing a mask, you are finally capable of being seen. And because you are capable of being seen, you are finally capable of being truly loved. Authentic connection is the profound reward for the agonizing work of facing your shadow and enduring the wilderness. When you engage with others now, you do not do so out of a desperate, starving need for validation. You are not a half person looking for another half to complete you. You are a whole, autonomous universe choosing to share your orbit with another. This profound wholeness allows you to see through the masks of the people around you. You look at the curated digital lives, the forced smiles, and the frantic performances, and you no longer feel alienated or inferior. Instead, you feel a deep, quiet compassion. You recognize the exhaustion in their eyes because you once carried that same unbearable weight. You become a beacon of permission for others to drop their armor. In your grounded presence, people unconsciously realize that they do not need to perform to earn their right to stand beside you. The connections you build from this place are rare, fiercely loyal, and terrifyingly intimate. You will trade 1,000 superficial acquaintances for a single conversation where two souls meet without flinching. This is the ultimate resolution to the existential terror we explored at the outset. The tragedy of the persona is defeated not by fighting the world, but by finding yourself. You realize that you were never severed from the human race. You were only severed from your own truth. Now, anchored deeply in your authentic nature, you can finally reach out across the void and touch the world, feeling its pulse, knowing that you belong not to a herd, but to the grand, chaotic, and beautiful tapestry of real human existence. And finally, conclusion. The journey from crushing existential emptiness to profound, unshakable wholeness is not a path of accumulating more accolades, but a brutal and sacred process of subtraction. It demands that we stop running from our internal darkness and instead descend into the basement of our minds to reclaim the exiled, unpolished fragments of our humanity, our shadow. By acknowledging these suppressed parts, we cease being hostages to societal expectations and enter the terrifying but purifying wilderness of individuation. In this space of profound solitude, we face the inevitable collapse of relationships built on our false compliance, paying the heavy price of temporary isolation to forge an unbreakable internal fortress. Here, suffering transforms from a senseless glitch into a devoted teacher, alchemizing our grief and rejection into unshakable self-respect. Having survived our own inner hell, we do not remain isolated. We return to the world deeply anchored in our truth, no longer needing to perform for validation. This newfound sovereignty allows us to form relationships based on terrifyingly intimate, authentic connections, rather than desperate codependency. Ultimately, defeating the tragedy of the false self requires the courage to lose the applause of the crowd to win back your own soul, allowing you to finally belong to the human experience, not as a masked performer, but as a complete, sovereign being. The profound lesson. True belonging never requires you to abandon a part of yourself. The agonizing loneliness you feel in a crowded room is simply the distance between who you truly are and who you are pretending to be. Your suffering is not a sign of weakness. It is the friction of your soul trying to break free from a mold that is too small for it. How to apply this to your current life? Audit your exhaustion. Notice which people or environments leave you feeling deeply drained. This exhaustion is often the energetic cost of maintaining a mask. Begin limiting your time in these spaces. Befriend the triggers. The next time you feel an irrational burst of anger or deep envy, do not suppress it. Ask yourself, what neglected part of me is crying out for attention right now? Use your triggers as a map to your shadow. Practice intentional solitude. Spend at least 1 hour a week in complete silence. No phone, no music, no distractions. Let the initial discomfort wash over you until you can hear the quiet, steady voice of your own intuition. Risk disappointment. Start saying no to small things you genuinely do not want to do. Allow people to be disappointed. Surviving their disappointment is the first step to building your internal fortress. Question for you. What is one specific situation or environment in your life where you feel you have to wear a mask the most? Please take a moment to share your answer in the comments section below so we can all learn and draw inspiration from each other's perspectives. If this video resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is what gives us the immense motivation to continue creating deep, meaningful content like this for you.